Hello students, welcome to the lecture on poetry. After the completion of this lecture, you will be able to explain the type of poetry, define the structure of poetry, discuss the elements of poems, understand the narrative poem. Let us begin the chapter by understanding the meaning of poetry. Poetry is a form of literature just as prose and drama. It is the most misunderstood because it is difficult to define. It is an expression of what the poet thinks and feels. Poetry is a creative use of words which intend to stir an emotion in the audience. Line is the basic unit of poetry which serves as a sentence in prose. The stanza is equivalent to paragraph in prose. Common stanzas are couplet, a two-line stanza, triplet, a three-line stanza, quatrain, a four-line stanza, cinquain, a five-line stanza. There are three categories of poetry. Narrative poetry, it tells a story, for example, ballads, epics, verse romances. Dramatic poetry, it uses technique of drama to present the speech of characters. Lyric poetry, it expresses thoughts and feelings of a single speaker. Example, sonnets, odes, elegies, haiku. Let us study each type in detail now. Narrative poetry. It tells a story, but with a poetic flair. It contains many elements as that of a short story. These are character, setting, conflict, plot. Dramatic poetry. It is any type of poetry in which disclosure of characters tells a story. It is usually spoken or sung. Rhyming structure is maintained through rhyming words. Example, Shakespeare plays are mostly written in verse. Lyric poetry. It does not tell story portraying characters or action. Initially, it is meant to be sung in a lyre, a Greek stringed musical instrument. But over time, it is largely meant for reading now. For example, The Eagle by Alfred Lord Tennyson. The structural elements in the poetry include line, couplet, strophe, and stanza. Let us study about the line building block. The basic building block of poetry is the poetic line. The poet decides how long each line would be and where it will break off. These choices affect readers' experience by sound when it is read aloud. Speed of reading, it depends on the length of the line. How a poem looks on page, it looks light, delicate, or packed solidly together. Emphasis, words at end seems more important than words in middle. Lines that finish at the end of sentences are called end-stopped lines. Stanzas. Lines are grouped together into stanzas just as sentences are grouped into paragraphs. Stanzas organize the ideas. Decision about form. Many decisions are to be made about line length, breaks, arrangement, speed, and rhythm. The answer works in two stages. Let the ideas flow, improve the poem's structure and form later. In this segment, we will study about the instrument which help to create a poem. These are called the elements of poetry. Alliteration. Two or more words which have the same initial sound. Example, pretty princess. Busy as a bee. Assonance, a partial rhyme which has the same internal vowel sound amongst all different words. Example, the tundra left the man hungry for buns. Metaphor, a comparison which does not use the words like or as. Example, life is a journey. Onomatopoeia, words that sound like their meaning. Example, buzz, moo, bang. Repetition, repetition of same word throughout to emphasize significance. Rhyme, repetition of sound within words. Example, loose, goose. Rhythm, flow of words within each stanza. Example, iambic pentameter. Simile, comparison using words like or as. Example, life is like a box of chocolates. Style, the way the poem is written. Example, freestyle ballad. Symbol, something representing something else through association, resemblance, or convection. Theme, the message, point of view, and idea of the poem. A narrative poem follows a similar structure as that of a short story or novel. It has beginning, middle and end, as well as characters and plot. It can take the form of rhyming couplets. It is the most ancient form still used by poets. Example, the Epic of Gilgamesh, a story of an Uruk king in 2600 BC. Types. It can be long or short. Long is a series of short poems. When a poem does not contain a predictable rhyme scheme, it is called a free narrative poem or a prose poem. Features. It contains a series of rhyming couplets, A-B-A-B, or synguapins, A-B-A-B-A, broken into stanzas. Misconceptions. It may not be linear or chronological, hence different lines may not weave their way to the main plot. Okay, we shall now study about different poets from all over the world as we continue the lecture. Anna Akhmatova was a leading Amist, a poet born in 1889. Her literary pseudonym was Anna Andreevna Goranko. Her first collection was in 1912 named Evening, followed by her second book in 1914 called Beats. Her earlier manner gave way to more classical severity in 1917, The White Flock, and 1922 as Anno Domini. She went silent due to the force of Soviet officials. She later won the Italy Award, a Taormina Prize in 1964. She was awarded honorary degree by Oxford University in 1965. The patron to young poets died in 1966. Simon Armitage was born in 1963 in village in Marston. He lived in West Yorkshire. He did graduation in geography from Portsmouth University and post-graduation from Manchester University. He wrote the thesis on effects of television on young offenders. Until 1994, he worked as probation officer in Great Manchester. He published several limited editions with small poetry before moving to mainstream publication. His first collection, Zoom, was published in 1989 by Blood X Books. His other works are as seen on the screen. Medieval age poets were expected to reuse established materials in their own work. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight belonged to a genre romance. However, romance in medieval ages did not mean love. It meant various European languages derived from Latin. Romance is a tale of adventure involving knights on quests with elements of fantasy and magic. It had damsels in distress which required to be rescued by the quest. Cliched or not, the romance remained popular for centuries, finally reaching its final end in Miguel de Cervantes' romance scoop. The most fertile field of the romance genre was the Arthurian romance. The masters were French, but they were produced all over Europe. French and England were rivals in medieval times. This had implications for Sri Gawain and Green Knight. In French tales, Gawain started positively, but later on becomes a womanizer and a villain. However, in English model, he is an ideal knight. Two idealized standards of romance were chivalry, courtly love. Chivalry is derived from Old French term for soldier mounted on horseback. It was a well-known concept. The Gawain poet touches this idea. The courtly lover was a man who devoted himself to his lady either by his brave action or by serving her. It has been more ideal than actual, but its importance didn't lessen with it. Gawain's battles are not with monsters but with lovely hostes to fight with words. Gawain is framed as the most courteous of knights. However, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight cannot be called straightforward romance as there are contradictions. Gustavo Adolfo Bacquer was born in 1836 in Seville to a family largely consisting of painters. He lost his father at the age of 5 and mother at the age of 11. He traveled to Madrid in 1854, attempting to paint and write for his survival. He contracted a serious illness in 1858. He married Casta Esteban, a doctor. He wrote prose fiction and poems in magazines. Some were published in 1868 but were lost in a revolution. Then he settled in Toledo after divorcing his wife. He became editor of La Ilustración de Madrid and rewrote his old lost poems. His textbook Book of Sparrows came to be widely known in 1914. He passed away in 1870 after the death of his brother Valeriano, whom he was very close to. After his death, his work got appeared in 2 volumes in 1871. Rabindranath Tagore was Asia's first Nobel Prize winner in literature. Surprisingly, he had written the national anthems of Bangladesh, India and Sri Lanka. The Indian national anthem was adopted on 24 January 1950 but sung on 27 December 1911 at Calcutta section of Indian National Congress. Vande Mataram was first published in Bankim Chandra's novel Anand Math in 1882, put to music by Rabindranath Tagore. He was the principal of India's first national university in Calcutta. He abandoned the post in 1906 and became the poet of patriotism, prophet of nationalism and lover of humanity according to C.R. Das. Since he was a promoter of independence, he was imprisoned from 1908 to 1909. Alfonsina Storni was born in April 1892 in Capriasca, Switzerland to Italian Swiss parents. Her father had business in Argentina but became alcoholic and the family shifted to Switzerland. In 1901, they shifted back to Argentina where her father died in 1906. Storni began to write to support her family when she was 11 and earned diploma in teaching in 1910. Her first book was published in 1916. Her collection are as mentioned on the screen. In 1921, she became the chairman of Infantile Municipal Labardon. In 1923, she became professor at Escola Normal de Lançois Vivas. In 1935, after being operated on her breast cancer, she suffered depression and cancer still continued. In 1938, she refused surgery again and moved to a small hotel where she wrote Voix Dormir on October 20. She committed suicide by drowning herself into the ocean. Let us now summarize what we have learned in this lecture. Poetry, prose and drama are the 3 major genres or forms of literature. The stanza in poetry is equivalent or equal to the paragraph in prose. Some of the more common stanzas are couplet, triplet, quadruplet and cinquan. The types of poetry are narrative poetry, dramatic poetry and lyric poetry. The elements of poem are alliteration, assonance, metaphor, repetition, rhyme, rhythm, smile, style, symbol and theme. Some of the famous poets of the 19th century were poet Anna Akhmatova, poet Simon Armitage, poet Gustavo Adolfo Bécquer, poet Rabindranath Tagore, poet Alfonsina Storni.